all the latest on the SaWGuy podcast, be sure to subscribe and don't forget that bell icon. Welcome to the SaWGuy podcast. As always, y'all know I am the SaWGuy, and you're joining me for the big episode 50 on the Eyes of Laura Mars. Honestly, I've heard of this movie for a long time. My parents never let me forget about it. This is one of their films that they first went to go on a date to go see. But I know a lot of you guys probably never even heard this one. It's a forgotten John Carpenter classic, right? I'm so excited to get this started, guys. So without further ado, let's get this shit rolling.
Hello, and welcome to the SaWGuy podcast.
I ain't no fucking clown. That is better.
You gotta clear your minds. He knows what scares you.
I'm just gonna bash your brains.
What the hell? The boogeyman is real, and you found him. What do you want?
I want to hear you scream.
Hell. Everybody loves popcorn.
As I said, The Eyes of Laura Mars is truly a forgotten classic of John Carpenter's. John Carpenter, we all know the history of what he did in 1978, how he went out and made Halloween. Well, before he did Halloween, he did this little film called The Eyes of Laura Mars. And it all started because he wrote the script. The script was good. You had Columbia Pictures that bought it. They said, okay, we want you to write the screenplay. He wrote the screenplay, but then they changed the ending. He didn't like that, and so, he basically did what he did for that film, got his foot in the door, and then the rest was history with Halloween, right? And what I like about this film is that you see a lot of inspiration that John Carpenter used towards Halloween that changed the face of horror for all eternity, I guess you could say. Because after Halloween came out in 1978, then all of a sudden you had the whole rise of slasher films and everything that came out at that time, right? And, this film, it's always overlooked because it came out in 1978, and you got to think of that time. It was the end of disco, a lot of disco-influenced themes here with this movie. And then at the same time, this film, if I have to describe this film the best way I can, this was the 1970s version of Silence of the Lambs, basically. And for this story, it was really unique. It had all that mystique that makes a perfect Carpenter film, John Carpenter's, right? But anyways, this film, it stars a lot of big-name actors who some were actually barely breaking out in this scene. Faye Dunaway, she's the main lead in this film, and she stars as Laura Mars. And, Faye Dunaway, she broke out with Bonnie and Clyde. Then you had Tommy Lee Jones, who stars in this film, and he was still kind of breaking in at this point, in 1978. What I thought was interesting is this name, right? Brad Dourif, the voice of Charles Lee Ray, yes, Chucky from Child's Play. He stars in this film. I believe this was like his third film. And, this is when he was breaking in too, because he did a fantastic job in this film, right? You also have Raul Julia, who stars as Gomez Adams in Addams Family. Like, he was already already established, adding a different credit to his name. But, he was in this film, and he did really good in this as well. It gets overlooked so much, and it's funny because, even when I was promoting this episode, I was telling everybody, Eyes of Laura Mars is going to be the next episode. Everyone's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, it's a John Carpenter film. What? John Carpenter wrote a film and he never directed? I'm like, yeah, you got to check it out, dude. But anyways, there's so many tidbits, so much I got to explain, and all this good shit. I'm going to get started on explaining because this movie is long. Like, I guess you could say it's close to almost 3 hours long. It's like 2.5 hours, almost 2 hours and 40 minutes. But the thing that makes this film so unique is the fact that this is the only American Italian horror film style. Does that make sense? Americans at that time loved the Italian horror style so much that they kind of made this as their own film. And we all know John Carpenter loves that style. He loves the style of the Italian horror films, right? And so that's what this film basically is. And as I said, the best way to describe this was the Silence of the Lambs in the 70s, right? So without further ado, this film stars, obviously Faye Dunaway. And this film starts off, it shows her face and then it kind of zooms in, shows a little bit of the credits and everything. And what's interesting is that Barbra Streisand sang in the soundtrack. She was supposed to be the main star, but, she read the script and she didn't like the violence, but, now she says she regrets it, right? But she did the soundtrack, and it was the #1 soundtrack back in the day. But anyways, it shows Laura Mars, the character that Faye Dunaway plays. It shows her face and then it zooms in, right? Then all of a sudden you see like this point of view of like somebody like looking around, right? Like their eyes, and it has the 2 eye holes, right? They're looking around, they see somebody cooking in the kitchen, and all of a sudden, they're looking around, scrounging around, and then they see this book where it shows like the beginning face of Laura Mars. Then all of a sudden, he runs into the kitchen and he has like a sharp ice pick, goes right through the chick's eye, and then all of a sudden it shows that he grabs the same pick, puts it right through the eyes of this book that's like in I guess you could say like in a glass case, right? Then all of a sudden, Laura Mars, she wakes up like from a nightmare. And all of a sudden she gets a phone call and she's like, yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, I'll be ready, because they're going to show an art gallery of all her work, because you see that, she is a photographer. They describe her as the instant star in the world of chic. She became famous because she basically does a lot of her photography art with models, but she, in a way puts them in a pose where it glorifies death, right? I thought it was a pretty interesting take on that because, in 1978, this was controversial for that, especially in the film. They played off a lot of that. So they show that she gets all dolled up and everything. She gets, driven up there. Then you start meeting the other characters. You see Brad Dourif. He plays a character named Tommy. And Tommy is kind of like her bodyguard / like driver, because she's pretty well known and famous and, she has a lot of money. Then you meet her, right-hand man, which is Donald, and he is basically kind of like her publicist. He basically does all the negotiating and all that shit for her. They start walking in, they see all these, news reporters. Hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And then they show that she's going in. Then it says, Eyes of Laura Mars. It shows the title finally, right? And then finally, she starts talking to these news reporters, and they're like, don't you guys have anything nice to say? And they just stayed quiet. She's like, all right, I'm going into the party. The party was hosted by her best friend, Elaine, because it's her gallery, which I thought was pretty cool, So she goes in, everybody's all having a good time talking and everything. And then you see some of the models, and then later on in the film, you start to learn a little bit more about the models, The main model that they had was Lulu, and then they had Michelle, right? Then it shows Tommy Lee Jones' character. He's looking at all these paintings, and he's like, this is disgusting, And then all of a sudden, that's when Laura Mars comes in. She's like, what, you a critic? And he's like, no, it's just, I don't see the joy in all this. Like, what's up with that? She's like, well, it's, art. And he's like, well, I can't pass that up as art. Then he was asking if he can meet Laura Mars because, he wants to see what type of voyeur this chick is, right? And then he doesn't know that Laura Mars is Laura, right? And so, she's playing it off, well, she's very old-fashioned, that's not her. So they pull her away because Donald's like, hey, we gotta talk to you, right? Come here, And all of a sudden he's like, is that you? Then the news reporters come in and they start asking him, like, what's your take on this? And so they pull her to the side and Donald tells her, hey, got some bad news for you. Doris Spencer was killed last night. Doris Spencer was the lady in the beginning who had the ice pick put through her eye. And what's so special about Doris is that she was the one who was the publisher / editor of the book that's like, showing off all of her art. Kind of like a gallery autobiography kind of thing. And so, they were all best friends. They're like, what the fuck? Seriously? And then you find out that's the reason why there's a lot of reporters is because people are asking about it. And then it shows Lulu. She goes up to Elaine and she says, hey, we're probably going to have to shut down the party because all these reporters are here. They're making a mess of things. And they're all like, well, what happened? Well, Doris, she was killed last night. She had something sharp like stabbed through her eye. And everyone's like, ah, shit. So then I guess they force the party out. They're all at home. Laura Mars is watching on TV. And then all of a sudden she gets a phone call from Elaine. And then Elaine says, hey, don't worry about it. Everything was good. Laura Mars, she thanked her for everything. Like, hey, the intro was great and all that. And then you see Raul Julia sitting next to her, right? And he plays a character named Michael Reisler, right? And all of a sudden, after they get off the phone, she hangs it up. And then he starts saying like, oh, Laura, she's still beautiful, huh? And then, they kind of get a little kink. They slap each other. And she's like, you pig! There's a little bit of dark humor, 1970s shit, right? And then they start making out. They do their thing or whatever. Then it's the next day, right? And all of a sudden, they're starting to get ready because now they're going to go and do a shoot at Columbus Square in New York. The whole film takes place in New York, right? So she's getting everybody ready. And then what I thought was cool is that they show, like, the other side of her work, like photography. Like, she's telling the makeup artist and everything, like, hey, I want her eyes to pop out from a mile away, make her lips, a little bit less blush, and then, tease up the hair a little bit, And I thought it was really cool. They kind of showed the interesting side of that, right? And then they go and meet up. Well, Laura goes and meets up with Donald. And they're talking to Bert, the guy who's funding the project, and it's all his money and how he's, promoting all this shit. And they're like, hey, you want to go through the maps? No, I don't need to go through the maps. Raise up that light a little bit more, and then let's get started to shoot, right? And they're doing a shoot on Columbus Square, and it's basically kind of like an apocalypse. So they're flipping over cars, they have all these water fountains going and all this fire and shit. Shows Lulu and Michelle, they're fighting over like a fucking jacket, pulling each other's hair. And Laura's taking pictures of it, right? Well, as she's taking pictures, she starts having these weird flashbacks, and she's not feeling good. Donald's like, hey, you okay? Yeah, I just need to take a break. So they take a break, they get back, they get done with it, and all of a sudden, when they're done shooting, Laura's walking, right? And she's getting this weird vibe. And all of a sudden, it starts this suspense music. And then she sees the eyes of the killer, and he's walking down the street. Then he goes into this building. He sees like this dog barking and shit. And all of a sudden, he sees Elaine coming out. And then he grabs her by the throat and stabs her in the eye. And she rolls down the fucking stairs and he kills her. And then, Laura, she's tripping out on this like, oh shit. Like she saw everything that the killer saw. So she starts running and she goes over there and she's trying to fight these cops to get in. She sees that Elaine's dead. And then she's telling the cop, I saw it. And the cop's like, how the hell did you see it? Where were you at? She's like, I was down the road. He's like, what the hell did you see it with? A telescope? And then, she thinks that they're making fun of her for being crazy. So they bring her in. They bring Donald, all the models, Tommy, and everybody to the police station. They start interviewing them. And I thought this was kind of cool, because I asked every one of them something different. And, one of them, one of the investigators, they were fucking with Donald, about like, hey, can you hook me up with this person? He's like, hell no, I ain't gonna hook you up with this person.
How'd you like to see my Barbara Walters? Hey, I do a terrific Lloyd Bridges.
And then they start interrogating Tommy, which is played by Brad Dourif. And they're like, hey, we know that you were raised in the streets and you're a tough guy, you like to gamble a lot. Why the hell do you have this knife? And he's like, oh, to cut rope and shit. He's like, not to protect Laura Mars? He's like, well, that too. It shows all those scenes, break it down. And then it shows Tommy Lee Jones' character. You find out that he's actually the lead detective on all these murder cases, right? And he starts talking to Laura, and Laura's like, wait a minute. You weren't there to go look at my shit. He's like, well, I was there to get to know you. And then he basically breaks it down to her. He's like, I don't know what the hell that you do, and how you get this information, but it's kind of weird that here's these photos of a crime scene, from 14 months ago to like a year ago, that they are the exact same pose as your pictures, and they've never been released. And, he's asking all these questions, and then she basically implies what we're all thinking. Like, oh, you think I went and did the murder and then reenacted in my work? And he's like, oh, no, I don't believe that, but it's kind of hard to believe what you're telling me here, that you see this shit. And, they released everybody except, Laura. And, Neville, the detective, which is Tommy Lee Jones, he takes her to Elaine's house. And he says, hey, I want to show you some evidence, see if you can help me out with this, right? They start looking through all Elaine's shit, and then they see that there's these suits. This is where the plot thickens. And all of a sudden, she sees these suits, and he's like, you recognize them? She pulls one out. She's like, yeah, they belong to a guy named Michael Reisler. And Neville's like, who's that? She's like, my ex-husband. And I was like, oh, shit! Your best friend was fucking around with the ex-husband. Oh, man. So now, it makes you think, like, was the ex-husband that did it, right? And then there's a picture of him and everything, and then Neville confirms it with her. He's like, hey, is this him? She's like, yeah. And then he starts asking her these tough questions. Do you still love him? She's like, no, I'm done. Let's go home. So he takes her home, and, he takes her back to her apartment, gives her the card. He finally introduces himself and says, hey, if you need anything, call me. If you remember anything, call me, right? She goes back to her place, and all of a sudden, fucking Raul Julia, puts his hands around her mouth, and then he's like trying to quiet her. She's all freaking out. She's like, Michael, what are you doing, Michael? They find it funny because it reminds me of Sam Lewis screaming Michael in Halloween, right? But anyway, she's like looking at him, and he's like, don't look at me like that. I did not kill Elaine. Why do I want to kill her? That was the best meal ticket I ever had. And then she's like, second best. I was your number one. And then they started having this bickering thing, and then you find out why they got a divorce. Because he was a writer, and, he was addicted to alcohol, and he was always a drunk, drinking a lot, And then he would say things like, oh, you were never there for me. You're always in your dark room. I know what kind of monster you could be at 3 a.m. She was having nightmares at the time seeing this shit, right? And then at that point, she just, she pours up a bottle of whiskey, in a glass, and then she's like, all right, is $50 enough to go? you know, because he's broke. He has no money and everything. He left everything in her house. Now the cops are looking for him. He's prime suspect number 1. So she gives him $100, and I start laughing because, you know, $100, it ain't worth shit now these days, right? But $100 back in 1978, I actually Googled this. It's about like almost $300-400. So I was like, oh shit, you know, you can live off of a fucking week for that. You know, and then later on it shows that Tommy and Donald, they're pulling up in a car, right? Because they're getting ready to do another shoot. And then they're arguing inside the car and everything. And this is another funny part. You know, they're screaming and everything. You don't hear it. He gets out of the car and he starts yelling at Tommy, "You're playing with the big boys! You're playing with the big boys!" He slams the door. And he goes up to the front door to open the door for Laura. And he's like, "Hi, darling." I started laughing. I'm like, fuck. You know, he's all tough and everything. And he's like, "Hi, darling." You know, it's kind of funny how they did that. And then Laura starts talking to him about like, hey, you know, there's these people that had this kind of psychic abilities before, and he's like, hey, don't talk about it, it will just go away. So they get in the car, and then you find out why, you know, Donald and Tommy were arguing, because of the fact of, you know, Tommy wanted to lay something out to Laura. And so as they're driving, you know, Tommy's like, hey, I want to be honest with you, I want to lay all my cards out, I want you to know something. Donald keeps like trying to shut it down, and he's like, I did time. And she's like, what? He goes, I've been in prison for armed robbery and assault. And I wanted to lay it out for you that I'm not here to harm you. You gave me a second chance. And Donald's like trying to play it off like, what? You know, like, I didn't know. And then he's like, bullshit, you knew that when you hired me. And then Laura's like, you did? You know, it was a trip. And then they start bickering. And then she's like, I don't want to talk to either one of you. Shut the fuck up. So they get there to the warehouse. Donald's all pissed, you know, and then he's like, all right, I'm gonna clean up this shit down here. And then he tells Tommy, you know, go pick up the flowers at the Greek place. And he's like, all right, cool. So they take Laura at the end of the warehouse, so she goes into her dark room and shit. Tommy comes out, and he starts to have like a one-on-one conversation. He says, look, I apologize. I should have been more upfront with you. You know I mean well. You gave me a second chance. She goes, I know. And so he goes and leaves. Laura goes up, you know, up these steps, goes into her dark room, and all of a sudden it starts suspense music again. Then she starts seeing the eyes of the killer, and you start seeing it in the point of view, like walking up the steps. Then all of a sudden it gets up to the door, and then she starts screaming, Donald! She's running, and she's running all crooked, right? Well, the reason why she's running all crooked is because she can only see the eyes through the killer. She can't see, like, what's in front of her. You know, she sees only through the killer. And so as she's running all crooked, because she's running the fucking heels. And then, you know, she's running down screaming, Donald! Donald! Holding on the side of the wall, trying to go down the steps. Holding on the side, Donald! All of a sudden, Donald comes up behind her. She starts screaming. And then she starts saying, the killer was here! I saw the fucking killer! So the cops came, and then they talked to her like, hey, are you sure you want to do this? You sound like you're overworked. And then she's like, no, fuck it, let's do it. Right? So now it shows one of the most controversial scenes in the film, where it shows everybody getting ready. This was controversial in 1978 because you had a lot of, like, not only just the nudity part, but then you had, it was very open, you know, and at that time it was a different culture, you know, so you had a lot of people in this scene. You know, it was very, at the time in 1978, it was very conservative, so seeing a lot of nudity, seeing a lot of people together, you know, it just, it was controversial, that to say the least. I'll leave it at that, right? So anyways, everyone's getting ready. She's telling everybody like, hey, more blush. And then, you know, she's telling one of the makeup artists, hey, I don't like the way her face looks right there in the eye. Make sure her hair is covering her eye, you know? Like, she's really persistent on it, right? Tommy comes in with the flowers. And then it comes to find out that Tommy had a little crush on Lulu, right? So, you know, he brings in the flowers. He picks out one of the flowers. He tries to give it to Lulu. And she's like, oh, nice. A stolen flower. You know, he had a little crush on her. And then it shows they start getting it ready by this pool. And they start dancing and shit. This guy comes in, she's like, okay, you're gonna lay down dead. He's like, all right, for $100 an hour? Hell yeah. So he lays down, like, you know, and he's like, eyes open or closed? Open, you know, and laying there. And then they gave Lulu the gun, like she's pointing at him like she had just shot him. Laura starts taking pictures, and then she starts having these weird flashbacks. And so they're like, okay, you know, Donald, he wraps it up and everything. Neville, he goes out to the side, you know, because he was there the whole time. And he starts talking to her about things. And then Laura, you know, the way she tells things to Neville, like, it sounds like she's crazy. And then from afar, you see her ex-husband watching everything. Like, okay, this is kind of weird, you know. The film lets you believe that it's her ex-husband and he has some kind of involvement, right? And so then you see Donald and Tommy, and they're like, hey, we locked up, we'll take you home. She's like, no, I'll be here with Neville, you know. And so they said, okay, you know, they leave. And then that's when she tells Neville, like, what she sees. She goes, you see this camera right here? Whenever I see the eyes of the killer, that's all I see. I can't see what's in front of me. So it explains why she was running all crooked and shit earlier in the scene. She starts talking about all of her work and everything like that, and then Neville says, okay, well, I'm gonna see what I can dig up, right? So he calls in some of the models, Lulu and Michelle, brings them back to the, to the police station, starts talking to them. Hey, have you ever had anybody call, harass you, send you threatening letters? And they're all like, well, all the time we're models, people give us the creeps and shit. We attract the creeps. So he interviews them and everything. And all of a sudden, after he was done, he sent them on their way or whatever. And, then it shows Laura, she's working on the pictures and shit. And then she starts having the vision again. She sees the picture develop into Lulu and she's like, oh shit. And then it comes. Then it shows the eyes of the killer. And he's looking through. And he sees, Lulu and Michelle, being like teenager girls, because they implied that they were in their early 20s. They were walking around in their shirts and panties. They hear a noise and they're knocking on the door. They go open the door and all of a sudden the killer comes in, whack, right in the eye, right there on Lulu. And all of a sudden, he walks in there and he sees Michelle and then whack, does it again. As that's going on, Laura, she's trying to call on the phone and then all of a sudden the phone keeps ringing. It's those old school rotary. So it took fucking 10 minutes just to dial for her alone, and then when she gets it, and then it goes to, the voicemail or the voice machine, and all of a sudden she hears it, and she's like, no, because she already has seen through the eyes of the killer that they're already both dead. Then it goes into the scene where now they're at the funeral for them, right? And while they're at the funeral, Michelle, her boyfriend, he goes crazy because they had the service and everything, and they all start walking out. He comes up and, he starts telling Laura, hey, I blame you for everything. You know all this. Laura, you're going to pay for this. You're going to pay for this. Oh! It was over dramatic, They had to be, it's 1978, right? And so at that time, Neville was like, hey, what do you want to do? Do you want to go back to the city? Do you want to go with me? She goes, I want to go with you. I don't want to go to the city. So Tommy, he takes Donald out, right? Neville, he drives with Laura, and it shows the scene that they're driving, and she's crying. She's like, I don't want to go back to the city. He's like, all right. So they go out in the woods somewhere, and they start talking. They start walking around the woods, and she's like, all I can think about is you. I don't know. I'm scared about all this. And then he's like, well, how do you think that makes me feel? I'm a cop. I'm supposed to be catching a killer, and you look how I'm fucking professional it looks to me, right? And all of a sudden, it was so weird. They didn't tie in any of the love connection, right? And all of a sudden, they were just madly in love to each other. And it shows that they were making out, and then it shows that they went back to her warehouse, they had sex and made love and everything, and then it shows later on that, it's morning time, he's getting his shirt on and everything, and then he tries to tell her, like, hey, this is how you shoot a gun. He gives her a Saturday Night Special, a 38 Special revolver, right? He's like, you point it like this, and then you shoot, and, you be doing the son of a bitch a favor, just use it in case you need to use it, right? And so now, this killer, he's already killed out like 4 people. He killed Michelle, Lulu, Doris, and Elaine. That's 4 people, and they were all best friends or people that Laura worked with, so it's somebody that she knows, right? This is where it's building up to this, right? And then all of a sudden, she starts telling Neville that she's going to go to Donald's birthday, because it's already Donald's birthday. He's having a birthday party at his house. Tommy drives her up there, and then all of a sudden, Tommy drops her off. She tells Tommy, hey, if anything, come back for me in an hour. And he's like, okay. So he's playing with his cards and shit. And then Donald walks him out. He's like, hey, I'll save you a piece of cake. Which I thought was fucked up. I mean, they're all chill with each other. They all work with each other. They didn't invite Tommy in. And then Tommy, what I thought was cool about Brad Dourif's character, he was like rough on the edges kind of dude. And he's like, I'll save you a piece of cake. And he tells him, he's like, you're a piece of cake. And he slams the door on him. I was like, oh shit, And so they're having the party there for Donald and everything. They're singing, the birthday songs and shit. And all of a sudden there's a phone call for Laura. Laura picks up, and then it ends up being her ex-husband. And he says, you don't hear the audio from the phone, but then, later on she gets off the phone, she tells Donald, she's like, hey, I gotta go. And Donald's like, what the fuck, you just got here? And, she tells him, like, hey, Michael said that he's drunk, he woke up at a laundromat somewhere, I need to go help him. And then Donald's like, well, go over there. And, she's like, well, the police are outside watching me, I don't want to lead him to the police because he's suspect number 1. He's talking about killing himself. And so she asked him to do a favor. The favor was they were going to switch clothes, and he was going to walk out looking like Laura Mars to distract the cops, where she goes in his car and takes off, right? So that's what he does. He wears Laura's clothes, and he's walking like this down the road. The cops follow her. And they're saying, hey, Miss Mars, what are you doing? Miss Mars. They turn around, they're like, what the hell are you doing, you son of a bitch? And they're, Donald turns around, he goes, it's my birthday, I can do whatever I want. They call him son of a bitch again, and he's like, stop with the fucking goes. You know, he's hitting him with a burst. That shit was funny. And all of a sudden, you see, Laura Mars, she drives off in this old school Pacer, this AMC Pacer. It looks like a Pinto, but it's a Pacer. And so anyways, as she's driving off, all of a sudden you see Donald walking back to his apartment to go back to his party. And all of a sudden, now you see the eyes of the killer again. So she's driving, and she sees the eyes of the killer. So she's, sideswiping her car, trying to U-turn. She's screaming, Donald! Donald! And then she crashes right through a wall. As it shows, the killer was, following Donald all the way up to the elevator, hiding right there behind the stairs. Then all of a sudden, he fucking killed him, right? And all of a sudden, now the screen goes black, and then it shows that Neville's walking her back to her place. And he's like, hey, you should have stayed at the hospital and everything. She's like, no, I can't cry. I tried crying for Donald. I don't know what to do. And, Neville's trying to get her to get away. And then all of a sudden now they have a lead on who do they think it is, right? And they're at Tommy's apartment because now they think it's Tommy and they're tearing up his shit, right? So Neville's there. And then all of a sudden, that's when you see Tommy call from a payphone. He tells him, hey, I want to talk first before you arrest me. Get rid of all these fucking cops. So they get rid of all the cops. They're all laying low on standby. He goes in there and he starts talking to Neville. And Neville's telling him, hey, so what happened here? And so Tommy tells his side of the story what happened.
Sneaking out the back door of the bar. So I said to myself, man, I said, what the fuck are you doing, man? Sneaking out the back door, running away, man, from what?
He was like, so I went down to the basement. I was at the bar. And then all of a sudden, I see this dude and he comes out of the elevator. And I start running through the back, and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing, man? You've done nothing wrong. They can't prove you done nothing wrong. The fuck you running out there for? That's exactly how he said it. And, Neville's trying to believe him. Then he's like, well, we got a problem here, Tommy. Is this your car from your deck? So he pulls out the evidence from his pocket. And, Tommy's like, yeah. He's like, this was found underneath Donald's body. So, you mean to tell me there was somebody else that killed him over there? And he's like, well, I saw some dude run. And he's like, you a drinker? You said you were at the bar downstairs. He's like, do you remember what you drank? No. Are you drunk now? No. And then, he's trying to corner him to make him sound like he's crazy. And he's like, wait a minute. He comes up and he starts looking at him. And it zooms in. Then he's like, you're trying to put me in fucking Bellevue. And Bellevue in the film is like the psychiatric ward. They're trying to make it sound like Tommy was crazy and he snapped and he went and killed everybody that Laura was associated with. Neville was kind of setting them up. And he's like, I'm not going in no fucking psych ward, right? And so that's when the other cop comes in. And all of a sudden they're trying to arrest him. And he goes, fuck you guys. And he pushes him, with the knife on him. Then all of a sudden he runs down the stairs. Another cop comes after him. He shanks the cop. And he starts running. Then Neville starts running through. And the other cop's shooting at him. He's like, no, don't shoot him, Sally. And he starts running. Tommy! They run down the block and shit. The cop comes right in front of him. He points out his revolver. Boom! Boom! 2 shots. Boom. Tommy was dead. And then he's telling him, Sally, what the hell, man? He's like, oh, I saved the state $200,000. The fuck, man? He was sick. Sick. He's trying to imply that Tommy was, not mentally there, right? But here's the twist in all of this, right? This is where it's going to build to the good climax, right? So he gets on the walkie, and then he tells Laura, hey, we got him. It was Tommy. I'll be over there soon. I love you. So they already established that they have a relationship, right? All the cops know and everything like that. So Neville's on his way back over there to Laura Mars' place. And as he goes inside Laura Mars, he opens the elevator. The elevator opens. And it ends up being fucking Michael, her ex-husband, in the elevator. Right? And all of a sudden, as she's packing up her shit, and all of a sudden, she starts seeing flashes of the killer. And then all of a sudden, the killer is, stabbing somebody in the eye and stabbing his hand. And you don't know who it was, right, that he killed. And then all of a sudden, she starts freaking out. And then all of a sudden, she gets to the front of the door, locks it. And then you hear ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, like trying to pound in. She's like, no, go away, no. Then all of a sudden, Neville, I don't know how the fuck this happens. He comes around and jumps through her patio because she's in a building apartment. And then he's like, hey, anybody in here? She's like, no one's in here. He's like, okay, good. And then, he starts talking about, it was Tommy. He was crazy. He didn't like how you're, I guess, glorifying death and prostitution. And, then he changes, he snaps. And he's like, so, I remember when I saw, my own mother would sell her ass up and down the street of Washington, D.C. And she got with this dude. I guess he was my father. Or a father. Either way, I saw him slit her throat, and I saw that blood drain. And then Laura's like, oh shit. Like, she starts to picture, like, that's not Tommy's story, you said I. But then all of a sudden, he's like, it's me that's been taking care of him. I've been taking care of this body. I'm the one that you want. And then it's implied that he has a split fucking personality. Oh shit, that was a twist. It was Neville the whole time. And all of a sudden, then she's like looking at his eyes, and then they go back and forth between the eyes, and then she sees through Neville's eyes. And she's like, oh shit. And then she starts running into the room and everything. And he pulls out the ice pick, right? And then he's gonna go and stab her like he's in her room. And her room has like glass mirrors and shit. And as he's gonna stab her, she runs up and hugs him and says, no, I love you. And then, he controls himself to the point where, he walks up to, her mirror and then stabs on the right side, on the right eye, right? This film plays a lot on the aspect of going after the eyes. And anyways, after that, he snaps back into Neville, and then he says, hey, if you love me, you gotta kill him. And then she's like, what? He's like, kill him before he hurts you. And then he basically explains in a way he had split personality he's been living with because of the fact of all the trauma that his life was put through from his own mom, seeing his own mom get killed and how she was a prostitute and everything. So he grabs the gun that he gave her, points it at him, and then, he squeezes her finger so it shoots the trigger. Boom! Shoots him in the gut, and then, he dies. And then that's when she's like crying. Then she calls 911, and then I thought it was just very cheesy because an operator was like super calm. 911, what's your emergency? I loved him, and he really loved me, and he was here to come and kill me. And she's explaining the whole story like in a quick 5-minute route, right? And then all of a sudden, they asked her like, so what's your name? And then she goes, Laura Mars. And then the film ends. It goes all black, and then you hear Barbra Streisand's song Prisoner play, and then it's like zooming into like Laura Mars's face, like, and I was like, oh shit, what a twist, right? This whole film, like I said, everything that I explained almost a 3-hour film in like 15-20 minutes as best I can for you guys. But it's a great fucking film. A lot of dialogue, but you also see a lot of different things that shows, Carpenter's talent. And this film, like I said, it gets forgotten about so much because everybody knows in 1978 John Carpenter made Halloween, and a lot of people forget that he did this to kind of, put his foot in the door that led to Halloween. And as I said, there was a lot of scenes in there, especially, he didn't direct it, but a lot of John Carpenter's writings, like shows, like talks about the scenery and where to look through and stuff like that. A lot of people think it was visionary what he did for Halloween, seeing the eyes through the killer. That actually started with Eyes of Laura Mars. And a lot of people forget about that. And, they forget about it because, John Carpenter, he doesn't really talk about that film. For whatever reason, when I was researching for this episode, John Carpenter, he doesn't talk much about it. He just says that, he worked on the film, they changed the ending, and that was it. I don't know if he's, upset, bitter, I'd be bitter too, if somebody changed my movie if it was really good and it got bought, but, that's why it's gotten forgotten, and as I said, it came out towards the end of 1978, and this film played a lot of aspect on the disco, that was going on at the time, because disco didn't die, I think, until like 1982, really, or 1981. But it had a lot of disco music, disco influence. Everything from the style, the chic look, the photography, the models, everything. And the soundtrack was amazing too. I was looking it up. Barbra Streisand, her #1 song was based off this film. It was called Prisoner, right? In this film, you also have, various different 1970 songs that were hits, what was it? Casey and the Sunshine, Shake, Shake, Shake. What else did you have? Native New Yorker, of course they had to play that. Boogie Nights, Boogie Nights. They played that one in there too. And at the time, because they didn't have CDs, they barely had, 8-track and cassette still early at that time. It was in the top 20 Billboard hits, because it was a great soundtrack. It was a mixtape of all the hits, right? So it had a good soundtrack. But what I thought was interesting too is that the producer, John Peters, he bought this script from John Carpenter because he wanted Barbra Streisand to star in this film. Now, when Barbra Streisand read the script and everything, she was like, it's too violent for my taste. So she backed out. And then Barbra Streisand came out and she basically says that she regrets not taking the role because this was such an iconic film. It was, I don't know how long it was, like in the top, like for 1978 films. Probably not that long because I know when Halloween came out, that's when it changed everything for horror films, right? But like I said, the best way that I can describe this film, it was Silence of the Lambs in the 1970s. And it was really good for what it was. And it gets truly forgotten about a lot. You know, as I said, that, you know, everybody I was telling about this episode, Eyes of Laura Mars, everyone's like, what? You know, I've never heard of that. And, you know, there's some diehard Carpenter fans out there. The only ones that I really knew about Eyes of Laura Mars, some of the older generations that tune into the show, and they're like, what? You're talking about that film? No one's talked about that film. I talk about that film because I remember seeing that film when I was about 5 years old. We had the VHS player. And in my family, what we used to, you know, wait till my dad came home from work, we eat dinner, and then we watch horror films. And, you know, we would watch that film, like, at least twice a week. And that's how I got to know it. And then, you know, when I tell people about it, they're like, what? I was like, yeah, that's a good film. And, you know, some people have seen it, some people haven't, so I wanted to bring it out to the limelight on it. And there was a lot of interesting things that they did to it, you know. Like, when they first announced this movie in the 70s, what they started doing in the newspaper, they show like a picture of Laura Mars' face, and then as it got closer to the release date, they started brightening up her face, and then you could see her face and her eyes. I was like, oh shit, that's cool ad marketing with that, you know? But that was 1978, you know, because they didn't have, you know, much of TV commercials and stuff like that. You had basic little trailers and things here and there, but it's an interesting film. As I said, you know, if you've never gotten a chance to check it out, I do believe that this is streaming right now on Amazon Prime, so if you have Amazon Prime, check it out. They recently did a Blu-ray release of it. I'm not sure which company made it. I think it was Mill Creek that recently did it, or it's just the movie. The DVD is actually a lot better buy. I found it used for a couple bucks, and what I thought was cool is that it had a lot of behind-the-scenes features that I didn't even know about. Like, oh shit, that was pretty cool. But it's a really good film, and it still to this day stands out to me because it's one of those old-style films that's like, okay, we like this style of film. We're gonna make it and Americanize it and do our own thing with it, right? Kind of reminds me of like spaghetti western, you know, when in Italy they would try to do like cowboy films. This is the same thing except with horror films, you know, because it's done in the Italian giallo style, right? But as I said, if you get a chance to check out this film, you will not be disappointed. This is a true classic, a forgotten John Carpenter film. And as you watch it, you know, just pay attention to little things, you know, whether it's the point of view of the killer or some of the cinematic scenes and things like that. You'll see where Carpenter got like a lot of his inspiration to do Halloween. And, you know, we all know the rest is history after that. But anyways, guys, thank you all for tuning in for my big episode 50. I didn't think I'd make it to episode 50, but thank you again for everybody that tunes in, that follows, that subscribes, everything. And I'll catch you all next time, as always.